The galaxy is not a democracy. We must be clear about that from the start. It is a beautiful, brutal, and ancient oligarchy, governed by the consensus. For millennia, the great species of the core systems, the elegant and psionically gifted Ilarii, the stout mineralogicians of the Cthar, the aquatic and deeply traditional Voral, and a dozen others, had guided the fate of known space from their glittering spires on the world of Unity Prime. Their rule was absolute, their wisdom unquestioned, their power as vast as the void between stars. They were the architects of peace, the curators of civilization. And they believed, with unshakable certainty, that they were the pinnacle of what sentient life could achieve. Humanity was a latecomer to this grand stage. We clawed our way off our cradle world, scarred and bloody from our own internal conflicts, only to find a universe that was already mapped, categorized, and governed. We were the noisy, chaotic, and alarmingly resilient newcomers. Our ships were crude, our technology a patchwork of reverse engineering and brute force innovation. The core species watched us with a mixture of amusement and disdain. We were unrefined. We lacked the serene grace of the Ilarii, the patient logic of the Cthar. We were too emotional, too volatile, too human. They tolerated us. Granted us a small token seat on the Outer Rim Council. They gave us access to limited trade routes, outdated star charts. We were like a child, permitted to sit at the adults' table but expected to be seen and not heard. And for a time, we played our part. We mined the asteroids they deemed worthless. We colonized the harsh high-gravity worlds they found uninhabitable. We grew quietly, in the shadows they cast. But our greatest sin, in the eyes of the consensus, was not our ambition. It was our nature. We questioned. We challenged. We did not accept their decrees as divine law. When they declared a system off-limits for spiritual preservation, we 07 asked for the scientific data. When they assigned us resource quotas, we presented counterproposals for more efficient extraction. We were a variable they could not control, a note of dissonance in their perfectly harmonized symphony. And so, the day finally came when the consensus decided that the symphony would be better off without that one discordant note. Rising conflict. The chamber of the high consensus was a masterpiece of alien architecture. A vast, circular room where light seemed to emanate from the very air, and the ceiling was a perfect holographic representation of the galactic core. The representatives of the core species floated on their anti-gravity daïses, their forms imposing and serene. In the very center, on a simple unadorned platform of cold metal, stood Ambassador Evelyn Reed. She was a woman in her late 50s, her hair streaked with silver, her posture ramrod straight in her simple gray diplomatic uniform. She looked small. Insignificant. The lead speaker was Ilarii High Counselor Valerius. His form was slender, almost ethereal, with skin the color of moonlight and eyes that held the cold, ancient light of distant stars. His voice was not loud, but it carried through the chamber, amplified by psionic resonance, each word dripping with condescending finality. "The proposal is simple," Valerius intoned, his long, delicate fingers steepled. "The species-designated humanity has been assessed. Your rate of expansion, your cultural instability, your inherent and demonstrated propensity for conflict. These traits are deemed incompatible with the long-term stability of the consensus. You are a chaos vector, a threat to the great peace we have cultivated for 10,000 cycles." Evelyn Reed's voice was calm, but it carried a steel that the chamber was unaccustomed to. "Counselor Valerius, with all due respect, our propensity for conflict is matched by our capacity for cooperation. Our history, while turbulent, shows our ability to learn to adapt, to overcome our baser instincts." A low rumbling sound came from the Cthar representative, Bordun. His body was like living granite, his voice the grinding of tectonic plates. "Instincts you have failed to master. Your presence introduces friction. The logical path is to eliminate friction before it causes a catastrophic failure." "Eliminate?" Evelyn asked, the word hanging in the air, cold and heavy. Valerius nodded, a slow, sorrowful gesture that was utterly devoid of any real emotion. "It is with profound regret that the high consensus has put forward Motion 7XR, a motion for systemic pacification." A holographic display flickered to life above them. It showed a map of human space, Sol, Alpha Centauri, Tau Ceti. Then, a wave of crimson light swept out from Unity Prime, washing over our stars, our worlds. The simulation showed our fleets disintegrating, our colonies going dark, our homeworld silenced. It was a clinical, clean depiction of genocide. Pacification, Evelyn repeated, the word tasting like ash. You're voting to erase us. It is a necessity, whispered the Voral representative, its voice a series of watery clicks and sighs. For the greater harmony of the whole. The many must outweigh the few. It is the way of the universe. We will now put it to the vote, Valerius announced. All in favor of enacting Motion 7XR for the systemic pacification of the human species? One by one, the daisies of the core species lit up with a soft blue light. The Ilarii, the Kthar, the Voral, the Tzan, the Slith. All of them. A unanimous, chilling sea of blue. There was no debate. No disensión. It was a foregone conclusion, a ritual of execution. Valerius looked down at Evelyn. The consensus has spoken. The motion carries. The pacification fleet will be dispatched immediately. Your species has 3 of your solar cycles to make its peace. Evelyn Reed did not scream. She did not beg. She looked at each of the representatives in turn, her gaze lingering on their impassive, alien faces. And then she did something they did not expect. She smiled. It was a small, cold, terrifyingly human smile. You misunderstand, she said, her voice clear and sharp, cutting through the sterile air of the chamber. You think this was a negotiation. It wasn't. This was a warning. You just voted to start a war you cannot possibly comprehend. Valerius actually seemed amused. A war? Your pitiful fleet of retrofitted mining vessels and antique patrol ships against the pacification armada? This is not a war, Ambassador. It is an extermination. No, Evelyn said, her eyes locking with his. It's an election. And you just cast your vote. She tapped a device on her wrist. A simple, unassuming communicator. The No campaign has begun. Back on Earth, in a command bunker buried deep beneath the Ural Mountains, a signal was received. A single, encoded word, cascade. The core worlds had grown fat and lazy on their own perceived superiority. Their technology was millennia old, perfected and static. Their military strategies were rote, predictable. They fought wars of overwhelming force, of psychological intimidation. They had forgotten what it was like to fight an enemy that was not just willing to die, but was fiendishly, brilliantly clever about how to make you die first. They expected us to meet their pacification fleet in a glorious, futile last stand. A final, cinematic blaze of glory. We had no intention of giving them a target. The pacification fleet, 1,000 ships strong, shimmered into existence at the edge of the Sol system. Great, beautiful city ships of the Ilarii, looking like frozen music. The blocky, impregnable fortresses of the Kthar. They moved in a perfect orderly formation, a wall of ceramite and energy meant to crush the spirit before it even fired a shot. Their scanners swept the system. Mars was quiet. The Jovian moons were silent. Earth hung in the void, a serene blue marble. There was no fleet. No planetary defenses. Just silence. Aboard the flagship, Harmony's Judgment, Fleet Commander Valerius, brother to the High Counselor, frowned. This was irregular. Scan for cloaked vessels. They must be hiding. No cloaked signatures, Commander, a tactical officer reported. But we are detecting anomalous energy readings from the asteroid belt. And from the Kuiper belt. Massive power buildups. Show me. The main viewer shifted. And then, the galaxy changed. It did not start with a bang, but with a whisper. 1,000 tiny, stealth-coated probes, no larger than a human fist, detached from asteroids all along the fleet's vector. They didn't fire lasers or missiles. They emitted a complex, modulated energy pulse. A computer virus, delivered via targeted gravity waves. It was a weapon the Corps had never conceived of, because their systems were too perfect to be hacked. They hadn't faced an enemy that had spent decades studying their systems, finding the tiny, almost imperceptible flaws in their code, the architectural vanity that left a single unified backdoor in every system for efficient governance. Across the pacification fleet, lights flickered. Primary weapons systems went offline. Navigation consoles displayed frantic, nonsensical data. Shields fluctuated and died. The perfect formation began to drift, ships bumping gently into one another in the Sudden, terrifying silence. Report. What is happening? Valerius roared, his psionic calm shattered. Before anyone could answer, the second phase began. From the darkness of the asteroid belt, a million pinpricks of light ignited. Not ships. Mass drivers. Railguns on an unimaginable scale, built into the very rock of the asteroids themselves. They had been constructed in secret, over years, disguised as mining operations. They fired not energy, but solid tungsten rods, accelerated to a fraction of the speed of light. The first volley struck the disabled Ilarii ships, not exploding, but punching straight through their elegant hulls, tearing them apart from the inside out. It was brutal, primitive, and devastatingly effective. The core fleet was thrown into chaos. They were being dismantled by rocks. Human response. On Earth, the command center was a hive of quiet, determined activity. General Makarova, a woman with a face like weathered stone, watched the tactical displays. Phase 1 complete. Their command and control is neutralized. Initiate Phase 2. Unleash the Hornets. Across the inner system, bay doors slid open on hundreds of hollowed-out moons and asteroids. From them poured the true human fleet. They weren't beautiful. They weren't grand. They were ugly, functional, and terrifying. Ships shaped like jagged daggers, covered in weapon hardpoints. They didn't have names like Harmony's Judgment or Eternal Serenity. They had names like UNS Vengeance, UNS Fist of Terra, UNS Calculated Risk. They moved not in a stately formation, but in a chaotic, unpredictable swarm. They used the debris of the shattered core vanguard as cover. They fired missiles that split into a dozen smaller warheads, each with a different guidance system to confuse point defense. They used kinetic kill vehicles, nuclear pump lasers, and plasma charges that clung to shields and burned through them. A young human pilot, Lieutenant Alex Corwin, gripped his controls, his heart hammering against his ribs. His ship, a Raptor-class interceptor, was a speck against the immense Cthar dreadnought before him. "All right, you big ugly brick," he muttered, a fierce grin spreading across his face. "Let's see how you like our urban renewal project." He dove straight for the dreadnought, his ship twisting and spiraling through a maelstrom of defensive fire. He didn't aim for the bridge or the engines. He aimed for a seemingly innocuous vent port on its underbelly, a detail human intelligence had identified years ago from stolen schematics. He fired a single, specialized torpedo. It shot into the vent, traveled deep into the ship's interior, and detonated right in the heart of its primary plasma conduit. The resulting chain reaction tore the dreadnought apart from the inside. It was a surgical strike. A bullet to the brain. This was happening all across the battlefield. The core ships were giants, slow and powerful. The human ships were piranhas, swarming them, finding the chinks in their armor, and tearing them to pieces. The core fought with the rigid discipline of a symphony orchestra. Humanity fought with the brutal adaptive efficiency of a street brawl. Back in the council chamber on Unity Prime, the holographic display was no longer showing a clean clinical simulation. It was showing the live feed from the pacification fleet. It was showing their utter annihilation. The representatives watched in stunned, horrified silence as ship after ship of their invincible armada was torn apart by weapons and tactics they couldn't even classify. High Counselor Valerius stared, his psionic aura flickering with shock and disbelief. This is impossible. They are savages, how? Evelyn Reed, who had been standing silently in the center of the chamber, finally spoke. Her voice was soft, but it echoed in the deathly quiet. "You made a fundamental error, Counselor," she said. "You judged us by your own standards. You have peace because you eliminated all conflict. We have peace because we learned to survive it. You have perfect technology because you stopped innovating millennia ago. Our technology is imperfect, but it evolves, it adapts, it gets meaner every single day. You thought our emotion was a weakness. You were wrong. It is the fuel for our ingenuity, the source of our defiance, the very thing that allows a mother to lift a car off her child, or a soldier to throw himself on a grenade to save his comrades. You voted to erase us because we were a problem you couldn't solve. But we are problem solvers. It's what we do." Climax. The battle for Sol was over. The pacification fleet was gone, reduced to expanding clouds of glittering debris. Not a single human capital ship had been lost. The cost had been in fighters, in pilots like Alex Corwin, who had given their lives not in a futile gesture, but in a calculated, successful trade. The core worlds were reeling. Panic, an emotion most of them had only ever read about in historical texts, began to spread. They scrambled their remaining defenses. They fortified their homeworlds. They expected the human barbarians to come screaming out of the void, thirsty for revenge, to burn their worlds and salt their fields. The attack, when it came, was nothing like that. It was silent. Invisible. Across the core systems, something strange began to happen. On Ilaria, the great psionic communication network, the backbone of their society, suddenly went dark. Not destroyed, but altered. The serene, harmonious frequencies were replaced by a cacophony of human transmissions. Not threats. Not propaganda. They broadcast the works of Beethoven, the soaring crescendos a shocking contrast to their subtle psionic melodies. They played speeches by Martin Luther King Jr., his words on peace and justice echoing through their silent cities. They showed images of human art, the Sistine Chapel, Van Gogh's Starry Night, the Terracotta Army. On Cthar, their planetary datanets, the source of their impeccable logic, were infected. Complex equations were solved in ways that defied their foundational mathematics, followed by a simple message: there is more than one path to the answer. Their mineralogical surveys were replaced with human geological studies that proposed radical new theories of planetary formation. On Voral, their oceanic environmental controls were subtly hijacked. The carefully maintained currents were altered, not to harm, but to create vast, beautiful and temporary patterns in their global ocean. Patterns that, from orbit, clearly depicted the double helix of human DNA. It was not an invasion. It was a demonstration. A lesson. The climax occurred not in space, but back in the high consensus chamber. The representatives were in emergency session, their dazes flickering with frantic energy. Their perfect civilization was being systematically, peacefully, and brilliantly humiliated. They weren't being conquered by force, they were being intellectually and culturally dominated. Suddenly, the main holographic display in the chamber, which they could not shut down, flickered to life. It showed a simple, human face. General Makarova. Members of the High Consensus, she began, her voice flat and uncompromising. The pacification fleet has been eliminated. Your military superiority is a myth. As of this moment, every one of your core systems is vulnerable. Our weapons are not aimed at your cities. They are aimed at your power grids, your communication networks, your environmental controls. We can plunge your worlds into darkness, silence, and chaos with a single command. A wave of pure, undiluted terror swept through the chamber. This was a threat they understood on a primal level. But, Makarova continued, a hint of that terrifying human emotion creeping into her voice, we are not you. We do not vote for genocide. The display split. It now showed a new simulation. This one did not show core worlds burning. It showed their ships, their infrastructure, left intact. It showed the human fleet, formidable and victorious, standing down. Withdrawing. You voted to erase us, Makarova said. And now we cast our vote. The simulation zoomed out to show the entire galaxy. The core systems, once a blazing hub of blue light, were now outlined in a steady, unwavering crimson. Human systems glowed with the same color. And a single simple phrase was superimposed over the image. The vote is unanimous. Our vote is for a new consensus. Makarova's voice was final. One where no species, no matter how ancient or powerful, has the right to pass judgment on the right of another to exist. One where our chaos and your order will have to find a way to coexist. The old consensus is dissolved. The debate is over. The results are in. Resolution. Silence. The kind of silence that exists between heartbeats, in the void before creation. The representatives of the core looked at each other, their arrogance gone, replaced by a dawning horrifying understanding. They had sought to prune a weed, and had instead awakened the forest. They had looked at humanity and seen a primitive, flawed creature. They had failed to see the terrifying potential within that flaw, the potential for boundless growth, for ruthless adaptation, for a compassion that could be as fierce as its wrath. They had not been defeated by a superior force. They had been out-evolved. High Counselor Valerius slowly descended from his dais. He walked across the chamber until he stood before Evelyn Reed. He looked ancient. Broken. The cold light in his eyes had been extinguished. We did not know, he whispered, the words a confession. We thought we were preserving harmony. Doctrine. And what is a soul, Lena? He asked softly, tapping his own temple. Is it here? A pattern of electrochemical signals? A unique arrangement of matter? If so, why can that pattern not be augmented, harmonized with another kind of signal? This was the old argument, the heresy that simmered in the basements of human science. Not the creation of a separate, alien intelligence, but the fusion of human consciousness with advanced computational systems. The Symbiosis Project. It wasn't about building a god. It was about building a better human. The Ixion sensors are calibrated for a discrete synthetic consciousness, Lena said, repeating the official unspoken hope. A single, powerful psionic signature. They might not even recognize what you're doing as a violation. Might not, Eris agreed, a grim smile on his face. It's a thin line to walk. But it's the only line we have left. They've capped our potential, Lena. They've put a ceiling on the human spirit. And I, for one, refuse to live in a cage, no matter how gilded. Narrator. Deep beneath the colony's capital city, in a shielded lab that didn't officially exist, the Symbiosis Project reached its culmination. The subject was Major Kalen Vance, a CDF pilot who had been gravely injured during a freak gravitic shear incident a year prior. His body had been saved by advanced medicine, but his neural pathways, the very map of his mind, had been shattered. The Concord's medical AI, limited by the Prohibition, could do nothing for him. He was locked in, a ghost in a machine of flesh, aware but unable to move, to speak, to feel.